The college football season is just a couple of weeks away. I don't want to belabor any realignment talk as we start off this conversation and start off this show. By the way, I'm Pete Mundo. We're Heartland College Sports. We cover the Big 12, but it was our most read article of the summer thus far at heartlandcollegesports.com, so I'm going to address it. I'm Pete Mundo. Thanks for being here. Smash that thumbs up below the video on YouTube. If you are on the podcast, a lot of you have spent a couple of minutes just dropping us that 5-star rating and review, and I'm so grateful for you taking a second out to do that. So let me just get to this as we start off this part of the show and start off this part of the conversation. Utah head coach Kyle Whittingham talked to John Canzano, who is very tapped into the former Pac-12 schools. And he got asked about realignment. And Kyle Whittingham did not say anything that we don't know. Big 12 fans should not be offended and suggest that this is Kyle Whittingham preparing or laying the foundation for Utah to leave the Big 12. This should not be perceived as Utah fans not wanting to be in this conference. That's not what this quote was from Kyle Whittingham. It was frankly just a guy stating what is pretty obviously happening here in this sport. Maybe his timeline's a little off, but let me read the quote to you from Kyle Whittingham, Utah head coach, that got everybody into a tizzy over the last couple of days. He said about a potential new wave of college football conference realignment to John Canzano, quote, "I think there's a major realignment coming, and it'll be a big one. I think it will create even more of a divide and exclusivity for the teams that are on the right side of that line. 20 months to 4 years, question mark? How about that for a time frame? In my opinion, it's going to look very much like an NFL minor league." Whittingham went on to say, quote, "I see an expansion of the playoff to 16 teams. The short version is super conferences. I think it's going to boil down to 40 to 60 teams in the super conference. I would not be surprised if they don't play anybody but other super conference teams. Make that a division as far as who you play. Like I said, a full-blown playoff. Whether or not the players will be employees officially remains to be seen. But I think that's very likely. I think that's where it's all headed." That was the quote from Kyle Whittingham. It's not a big deal. Like, anyone who's trying to read into that or look into that or give you some clickbait nonsense on why this is secretly a massive story and you don't want to miss it, we're telling you who's coming to the Big 12 next. Stop. Kyle Whittingham just said what we all know to be true, what we all see as the writing on the wall. Now, how these super conferences look, is it the SEC, the Big 10, and eventually, I believe, the Big 12? If the ACC does collapse, could be. Is it just the Big 10 and the SEC? Maybe. Is it neither? Is there just this grandiose college football super conference, and then we go back to divisions, and the divisions are basically what the conferences were a generation ago, where the Big 10 is like a 10-team conference in the super conference. The old Big 12 is a division within the super conference, and suddenly Nebraska and Oklahoma and Texas and Oklahoma State and all these schools are back together again. I don't know. But Kyle Whittingham did not make any wild prediction on that front. He just said super conferences and probably a 16-team playoff are coming. It's not exactly bombshell material. And I know that Big 12 fans have been a little bit skeptical of Utah joining this league. A lot of things are going right for the Big 12 right now. Everybody is singing Kumbaya. Everybody is moving in the same direction. And there is concern that the Big 12, things are almost too good. There's got to be somebody who's going to ruffle the feathers like Texas. And because there's been a bunch of loudmouth, blowhard Utah fans on social media, there's a perception amongst old school Big 12 fans that Utah's going to fill that void. I don't think that's going to happen. I have met a lot of Utah fans on the Heartland College Sports forums, and they're all like, we're happy to be here, like the conference. Yeah, we got a few blowhard fans like every fan base does. They're an oversized percentage on social media, but that ain't us. I don't believe we're going to get that. Were they maybe a little too loud about the whole Las Vegas for the Big 12 tournament stuff? Sure. But that's water under the bridge. I'm not too concerned about it. I really like the Utah fans I've come across so far as, the owner of Heartland College Sports. So I think some of that's being overblown. I think Big 12 fans have a natural edge. Listen, no conference has been through what the Big 12's been through the last 15 years. I know the Pac-12 ceases to exist, but I mean the roller coaster of a ride that fans of this league have been to going back to the first batch of realignment in 2011. But you could go back to the old Big 8 Southwest merger. But certainly the last 15 years, nobody's dealt with what the Big 12 has dealt with. Not even close as a fan base. So it's fair to be skeptical of anyone who might be trying to ruffle feathers as the new kid on the block. But I'm just here to tell you, I am not concerned about Utah joining the Big 12. I think they're going to be a welcomed addition. I don't believe this was Kyle Whittingham trying to lay the foundation for Utah to be in the Big 10 or something like that. Not that they wouldn't accept an invite, but the reality is any Big 12 team probably right now, if they got the invite, they get a $30 million annual raise. They probably would take it, Utah or anybody else. But there's nothing to suggest it's happening anytime soon. So why would I sit here and freak out about it? He was asked the question by Canzano. He answered it honestly, and that's that. And that's really all there is to it. There's nothing more than that in the story here. So I'm not sweating it. I'm not sitting here worrying about it, and I don't think any Big 12 fans should either. He's stating what we all know to be true. As for the timeline, Dennis Dodd of CBS Sports pushed back on the timeline, saying nothing's going to happen before, the next batch of contracts, 2030-ish, give or take. Well, Whittingham said 20 months to 4 years. 2 years from now, 20 months, give or take, is 2026. 4 years from now is 2028. I mean, by the time you're setting things up, by the time you're realigning things, by the time you're expanding playoffs and things like that, those decisions are probably made by the end of the decade, right? So I know Dodd was vehemently freaking out about this comment from Kyle Whittingham, and I just don't see it as that big of a deal. And I don't think his timeline is all that far off from what the timeline's going to be. And of course, the next domino to fall is what the heck happens with the ACC, what happens with the Florida State Clemson lawsuit. But all that stuff right now is just a waiting game. It is all a waiting game as we sit here right now and we talk about what this looks like going forward and just kind of putting an end to some of the drama and some of the rumors and people just looking for attention on this stuff. That's all. Rob writes to us on YouTube, "Thanks, Pete, for clarifying what Coach Witt said. I agree. He was just reading the writing on the wall with the super conferences. Us non-blowhard Utah fans are excited to be here." Well, Rob, we are excited to have you, buddy. And we're grateful for all the new fans from the new schools that have come into the Heartland College sports community, come onto this podcast. If you are new from one of the new teams, if you could drop that 5-star rating and review, we'd greatly appreciate that. Same thing, of course, with our viewers. Join the forums and our radio listeners. We always appreciate you guys and are grateful for your time as well as we roll through another show here on Heartland College Sports. I'm Pete Mundo. Thanks for joining us as always and being a part of it. So we also got this on what was a very busy and very fun Monday. We got the AP poll coming down. The preseason AP college football poll is here. That means college football's right around the corner. And for the Big 12, it was a very good preseason AP poll. 5 teams listed in the preseason top 25. You had Utah at 12, Oklahoma State at 17, Kansas State at 18, Arizona at 21, and Kansas at 22. And then you had 3 other teams receiving votes. Iowa State got the most of teams that received votes but did not make the top 25. Then West Virginia and Colorado got 1 vote in the top 25. So for the Big 12, this is a conference of depth. This is a team that, okay, does not have a top 10 team in the country. But when you look at it, this is going to be, as we've been saying all season long, the deepest, the most competitive, and the most compelling conference in the country. And the AP poll in many ways proved that. When you look at the Power Four conferences, the SEC and the Big Ten both have 7 ranked teams. The Big 12 is 5, and the ACC has 4 in the top 25. Then there's Notre Dame. And yes, when you look at the top 10, the Big Ten has Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Michigan. They've got 4 of the top 10. The SEC has Georgia, Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss. That's 4 in the top 6. And then you throw in Missouri at number 11, right ahead of Utah. Okay, yes, they have more teams in the top 10. And because the AP and because the SEC likes to create this environment of we're the toughest league in the country, we're going to play 8 conference games. Oh, by the way, we'll have an FCS game in November as well. Because they get away with that nonsense, they probably will remain with more teams in the top 10 than anybody in the Big 12, because also the Big 12 is going to be knocking each other around due to the competitiveness over the season. So I think if the Big 12 can keep 5 teams in the top 25, that's a good place to be. I also believe that what the Big 12 is going to end up getting is probably a lot of those teams between 15 and 25, and they'll be pinballing off each other all season long. I would be surprised, not shocked, but I would be surprised to see a Big 12 team sustain time inside the top 10. Not that they won't get there, not that they don't deserve to be there, but I'm saying, are they going to sustain like 3, 4, 5 plus weeks in the top 10? I find that very hard to believe just because of how I think this conference is going to play out this season. So that's why it's more important to make sure this conference has a very good showing with at least one team in the college football playoff. Maybe, although I don't think this is the year for 2, but maybe a eke in 2 to the college football playoff from the Big 12 conference. But that would really take the cards to fall perfectly. You'd have to have a 1-loss team that's a favorite in the Big 12 championship game lose to a very good 2-loss team or a fellow 1-loss team, and then both those teams get in. One get the auto bid, one gets an at-large. But then you got to make some noise, because that's when you get down to the point of saying, okay, we've gotten out of the playoff. We've got 1, maybe 2 teams in. And then the conversation becomes, okay, well, the Big 12 hasn't had a team consistently in the top 10 all year. The SEC has had 4. Why should we take the Big 12 seriously? That's when the Big 12 is going to have to put itself in a position where it wins the games on the biggest stages. That's when it's going to have to happen. But if you're a Big 12 fan, this is exactly what you would expect to see out of this AP poll. And I will say, by the way, I like to look at the charts that show how every AP poll voter voted. And there were a couple of voters that had Utah in their top 6 or 7 in the country. So there is a lot of love for Utah. I think it's well-deserved. I'll give you my predictions for the season coming up. Next week is when I'll be doing my predictions for the Big 12 and the Big 12 championship game matchup that I think is going to be happening. So that's why you want to be subscribed to the podcast, to the YouTube channel, and on the radio show. You want to be in all those places, because we'll do that show here definitely, obviously, before the season starts, but probably in the next week or so. I will give you that for the Big 12. But that's why it's going to be such an outstanding season. Also, this comment here on social media, Pete, how great would it be to have 2 undefeated Big 12 teams in the conference championship game? Utah and Kansas State would both get in. Well, yes, both would get in, but I don't see any chance that happens. I don't. I'm actually starting to believe Kansas State might be a year away, and they may actually disappoint by some of the expectations that are out there. I'll explain more on that coming up as the season inches closer, but I'm starting to wonder if Kansas State is getting a little too much love with the changes at offensive coordinator, with Avery Johnson starting for his first season in college football. The expectations are sky high with Dylan Edwards. I mean, I love Chris Kleiman. I love the Kansas State football program. I think it's one of the staple programs in this conference. I just wonder when it comes to getting into a college football playoff and winning at a very high level, if the expectations are getting too high, because you look at a lot of predictions around just college football in general from some of the national folks, and you've got a lot of people saying K-State's going to be in the playoff. It's not that they can't. It's not that it would surprise me if they were to get there. It's just I'm starting to think that the hype is not worth it for Kansas State right now. No way, no how. Now, this is a very good point by Victor that I want to address. I'm Pete Mundo. We're Heartland College Sports. We cover the Big 12. It's great to have you here. As always, subscribe to the show. We appreciate that. Pete, I am surprised they did not put West Virginia anywhere in the top 25 just to pump up Penn State in week 1. Well, I will say this. West Virginia has been as underappreciated and disrespected of a 9-win team as I've seen in a very long time. It's like nobody believes that what happened for West Virginia last year is real or sustainable. And I think it's real and sustainable. Now, their schedule does them no favors. We've gone over that this offseason. West Virginia has 11 Power 5 games or Power 4 games. It is a brutal gauntlet of a schedule. The start to Big 12 play is against 5 teams that all think they can compete for a Big 12 title. I mean, they got no favors on the schedule. But my goodness, this team can be better than last year. I mean, I knew they lose some linemen, of course, to the NFL, but Garrett Green, a year older, a year more mature. You may have the best 1-2 punch at running back in the entire Big 12 conference. You've got weapons that continue to come in and develop under Neil Brown. So there is a lot to like about this West Virginia team and the trending of the program. And by the way, they could win 9 games this year, and it would be a far more impressive 9-win season than last year. And they should be in the top 25 when all is said and done if they end up being a 9-win team. Because the Mountaineers, I mean, my goodness, you look at this schedule for West Virginia, and it is absolutely brutal. Not only is there Penn State to open up the season at home, the 8th-ranked team in the country in the preseason polls, you got Pitt a couple of weeks later in the backyard brawl. Then conference play opens up Kansas, Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Kansas State, Arizona. 5 teams that all think they can win and or play for a Big 12 title. That is absolutely brutal for the Mountaineers. But they're still getting wildly disrespected. I mean, how is there a vote? And I say this with all due respect for Colorado, right? I mean, Colorado, of course, gets a vote. West Virginia gets 17. But I thought there would be more for the Mountaineers. They'd be closer to that top 25. They weren't all that close. I mean, the top team to receive votes and not get in was Louisville with 111. West Virginia got 17. And I know that Mountaineers fans love having this chip on their shoulder. I know you WVU fans, okay? I've known you for a long time in the Big 12. I think secretly you guys love the disrespect. And I get it. I understand why you love the disrespect that your team is getting. And you should, because that's West Virginia football. Okay? If you guys weren't being disrespected there, if you weren't being, shown the backs by the college football media, secretly, you wouldn't like it. You want that edge. You want that chip. And I think Neil Brown prefers having that chip for his team and for his guys. And we had Neil Brown on this show, by the way, a few weeks back. So find that on the podcast. That's why you got to be subscribed to what we're doing at Heartland College Sports. But I would agree that when it comes to disrespect and teams that have not gotten a reasonable amount of attention in this conference in the offseason, you can put West Virginia very much at the top of that list. Now, I would also say I'm just simply surprised, and this is something that I've talked a lot about this offseason. But you look at UCF last year, and UCF was a couple of plays away from, instead of being 6-6, being 8-4. I mean, they were close in a couple of games. They blew that Baylor game early in the season. We know how that played out. I mean, that was an absolute debacle of a game. They were up, 35-7 or something crazy. They nearly beat Oklahoma on the road. They lost to Texas Tech by a single point. So they finished the year 6-7. If they win 2 out of 3, they're 8-4 in the regular season. And I believe the way people are looking at this UCF team is much different this year in the offseason than how they're currently being viewed. This is a team that has some of the most top-end talent in the conference. Can Gus Malzahn put it together? That's always the million-dollar question. But he's got a quarterback that suits him better at KJ Jefferson than he had last year in Plumlee. And that's just step one. He's got incredible returning talent. And it's one of these years where somebody's going to pop from the middle in the Big 12. And I would not be surprised at all if we're sitting here in November talking about UCF football making a run at a Big 12 championship game. That wouldn't surprise me in the least. I wouldn't be shocked if that Utah-UCF game in the final week of the regular season is somehow a play-in game for a Big 12 title. Or the week before, West Virginia. The Knights are on the road. That's a knockout game for a chance to go to a Big 12 championship. There's so many things that when you look at UCF's schedule, their November is fascinating. Arizona, Arizona State, West Virginia, Utah. 3 of those games could have Big 12 championship game, therefore playoff implications. And if you're a Knights fan, buckle up, man, because it could be a lot of fun down the home stretch. And I was shocked they didn't even get some votes in the AP poll. None whatsoever. I would have given them some votes. I would have given them a vote because I think this team is top 25 worthy. I'm Pete Mundo. We're Heartland College Sports. We always appreciate you being here and joining us as a part of the show. Make sure you are subscribed. That way you never miss an episode, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on the podcast. I love sharing some of the reviews that you guys write on iTunes and on, you can't leave them on Spotify, but on iTunes. I'll sometimes screenshot those and put them up on our Instagram page, which I think you guys should follow us at as well, because it's a great way to show some love for what we're doing covering the Big 12. The season is almost here. We've got so much more content coming your way. Make sure you are subscribed, and we'll talk to you soon. I'm Pete Mundo. We're Heartland College Sports. We'll talk to you soon. Go Big 12.